The training hall stretched wide across the station's central ring, high ceilings arching overhead like the ribs of some massive creature, and morning light filtered through the observation ports in pale blue streams that made the polished floor gleam. Like water, Lieutenant Katie Morgan stood at the edge of the sparring circle with her arms crossed, watching as Commander Vexter demonstrated the fifth form of Krallen blade work to the assembled cadets, all of whom came from a dozen different worlds and species. The Krallen instructor moved with fluid grace despite his massive frame, his forearms flowing through the ancient combat patterns while his crest flared with concentration. And the traditional blade in his primary hands caught the light with each precise movement. Katie had been assisting Vexter for 3 months now, ever since the Academy decided that human combat methods should be integrated into the standard curriculum. Though she knew many of the older instructors still viewed her presence as a political necessity rather than a genuine addition to their warrior traditions. "Observe the stance," Vexter called out to the students, his voice carrying easily across the hall without needing to shout. "The rear foot anchors your spirit while the forward foot projects your intent, and the blade becomes an extension of your honor." Katie suppressed a smile at that last part, knowing that her own people back on Earth would laugh at the idea of a weapon being anything other than a tool for winning fights. But she had learned to respect the Krallen philosophy, even if she didn't share it among the cadets. Young Danny Pierce shifted his weight nervously while trying to mirror the commander's movements, his human frame looking almost fragile. Next to the hulking forms of the Krallen students, Danny had arrived at the Academy 6 months ago, one of only 12 humans in the entire facility. And Katie could see how hard he worked to prove that his species deserved their place among the warrior races of the galaxy. Next to Danny stood Cadet Zarkith, third son of a Krallen ruling house, his crest marked with the silver bands that denoted his royal lineage. And his movements through the forms were perfect in a way that spoke of lifelong training in the traditional arts. Katie had noticed how Zarkith watched the human cadets with barely concealed contempt, his mouth turning down whenever they struggled with techniques that came naturally to those raised in warrior cultures. "Partner formations," Vexter announced, gesturing for the students to pair off. "You will practice the challenge protocols we learned last week. Remember that proper form shows respect to your opponent." The cadets began moving into pairs, and Katie saw immediately that this would be trouble when Zarkith deliberately positioned himself next to Danny. His smile showing too many teeth, she moved closer, keeping her expression neutral while her instincts screamed warnings from years of actual combat experience that most of these academy instructors had never faced. "The human struggles with basic forms," Zarkith said loud enough for others to hear, his forearms crossing in a gesture that signaled dismissive amusement among his people. "Perhaps I should demonstrate proper technique slowly so the primitive mind can follow." Danny's face flushed red, but he held his tongue, remembering the countless lectures about maintaining diplomatic relations even when provoked. Though Katie could see his hands curling into fists at his sides. "All students deserve respect regardless of their combat background," she said quietly as she passed them. But Zarkith merely inclined his head in mock deference. Vexter seemed oblivious to the tension as he continued explaining the proper protocol for issuing formal challenges, describing the ritualized phrases and postures that had governed Krallen duels for thousands of years. Katie understood why these traditions mattered to species like the Krallen, how they turned lethal combat into something with rules and meaning. But she also remembered the chaos of real battles, where honor meant nothing and survival meant everything. The other human cadets were scattered throughout the room, each paired with students from different species. And Katie noted how carefully they moved through the unfamiliar forms while trying not to make mistakes that might reflect badly on their entire race. It had only been 5 years since humanity joined the Galactic Federation, earning their membership through brutal border conflicts that proved humans could fight despite coming from a relatively peaceful-looking world, and the memory of those battles still colored how other species viewed them. Begin the challenge sequence, Vexter called out, and the training hall filled with the sounds of ritualized combat as pairs of students went through the ancient protocols. Katie watched Danny attempt the opening stance of a formal challenge. His pronunciation of the Kralin phrases rough but earnest, while Zarkith stood with exaggerated patience. Like a parent indulging a slow child, something in the prince's posture made Katie's combat instincts flare again. That subtle shift of weight that suggested he was preparing for something beyond a practice drill. But before she could intervene, Vexter called her over to assist with another pair of students. She moved reluctantly, keeping one eye on Danny and Zarkith while helping two Valorian cadets correct their footwork. And she heard Danny's voice rising with frustration as he tried to complete the challenge. Protocol. Your words dishonor my lineage. Zarkith's voice cut through the general noise with sudden sharpness. And Katie's head snapped around to see the Kralin prince's crest had flushed dark purple with genuine anger. Danny looked confused and frightened, clearly not understanding what he had said wrong. And he tried to repeat the challenge phrase with corrections, but Zarkith was already advancing on him. You insult my family with your crude attempts at proper speech, the prince hissed, his forearms spreading in a threat display. You think because humans fought their way into the Federation that you deserve to stand among true warriors. Vexter was moving toward them now, his own crest rising in alarm. But Katie had already started forward because she recognized the look in Zarkith's eyes from too many pre-fight moments in too many real conflicts. Cadet Zarkith, this is a training exercise, the commander said firmly. But the prince ignored him while continuing to circle Danny like a predator. Apologize for your insult, Zarkith demanded, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had never been denied anything. Assume a submission posture and beg pardon for disrespecting my house. Danny stood frozen, torn between the humiliation of submitting and the danger of refusing, while the other students stopped their own practice to watch the confrontation with varying degrees of interest and concern. Katie could see this situation spinning out of control, could feel the weight of 5 years of interspecies tension building towards something that would define how humans were seen in this academy, and maybe across the whole Federation. There's no need for submission, she called out, her voice calm but carrying across the suddenly quiet hall. The cadet made an honest mistake in pronunciation. That's all. Zarkith turned to look at her with something dark and dangerous in his eyes. Something that said he had been waiting for an excuse exactly like this. And Katie understood with cold certainty that Danny's mispronunciation had been nothing but a convenient trigger. This does not concern you, instructor, the prince said with emphasis on her title that made it sound like an insult. This is a matter of honor between warriors. The hall had gone completely silent now, except for the hum of the station's life support systems. And Katie saw Vexter watching her with an expression that begged her not to make this worse. But she also saw Danny's face, saw the fear and humiliation there, saw in him every young soldier she had ever trained who needed someone to stand with them when the situation went bad. And she knew she couldn't walk away regardless of the diplomatic consequences. Katie took 3 measured steps forward until she stood between Danny and Zarkith. Her stance relaxed but balanced in a way that anyone with real combat experience would recognize as dangerous preparation. Step back, cadet, she said quietly to Danny without taking her eyes off the Kralin prince. Go stand with the other students. Zarkith's crest flared wider and darker, his forearms spreading in a display that among his people signaled extreme offense. Though Katie noted with clinical detachment that his weight distribution suggested he was more interested in intimidation than actual combat. The human insults my bloodline, and you coddle him like a hatchling, the prince's voice rose with theatrical outrage. playing to the watching students rather than actually addressing Katie. "This is why your species will never be true warriors." Vexter moved closer with his hands raised in a calming gesture that looked absurd coming from something his size. His voice taking on the patient tone of someone trying to prevent disaster through reasonable discussion. "There has been a cultural misunderstanding," the commander said carefully. "Cadet Pierce meant no disrespect to your house. He simply lacks familiarity with the proper traditional phrases. Ignorance is no excuse for dishonor." Zarkith snapped back, still not looking at Vexter but keeping his attention fixed on Katie with an intensity that suggested he viewed her as the real opponent in this confrontation. Danny had moved back as ordered, but Katie could hear his ragged breathing and knew the young cadet was struggling with shame at needing protection, though she also knew that shame was better than whatever Zarkith had planned. The other Kralin students in the hall had begun making a low humming sound that Katie recognized from her cultural briefings as approval or encouragement, while the human cadets stood silent and tense like soldiers waiting for orders they weren't sure would come. "Your student has two choices," Zarkith announced in a voice that carried authority despite his youth. Clearly accustomed to making pronouncements that others obeyed, he may assume the full submission posture and formally apologize to my house, or I may claim right of correction. Kitty felt her jaw tighten at the phrase right of correction, which was a Kralin tradition that allowed higher-ranked warriors to physically discipline those who showed disrespect. Though the Federation has supposedly banned its use in mixed-species environments, there will be no submission and no correction, she said flatly, her tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion or a request, but a simple statement of fact. The humming from the Kralin students grew louder and took on a different quality, surprise mixed with anticipation, while Vexter looked increasingly distressed as his carefully controlled training session deteriorated into something much more serious. Zarkith smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression despite the attempt at diplomatic politeness, his teeth showing in a way that his species used to signal that negotiations had failed and action would follow. "You dared to interfere with traditional law," he said slowly, each word precise and carrying weight. "You stand between a warrior and his rightful claim to satisfaction. I stand between a bully and a student," Katie replied with equal precision, watching the way Zarkith's secondary hands had begun curling into fists, while his primary hand remained open in false casualness. The prince's crest went almost black with rage at the word bully, and she saw his whole body tense with the desire to lash out. But he was still playing to the watching crowd and needed to maintain his image as the wronged party. "Then you leave me no choice," Zarkith said with theatrical sadness, turning as if to walk away while his body language screamed the opposite intention. "If the human will not submit, then I must enforce proper respect." Everything happened in the space between heartbeats, faster than most of the watching students could track. As Zarkith spun back around with his primary right hand already in motion for what should have been a devastating backhand strike, but he didn't aim for Katie, who stood ready for his attack. Instead, he pivoted smoothly and his hand flashed toward Danny, who had relaxed fractionally when the prince appeared to be, leaving the crack of impact echoed through the silent training hall like a gunshot as the back of Zarkith's hand connected with Danny's face, the young human's head snapping sideways from the force while his body followed in an awkward stumble. Danny went down hard on the polished floor, blood already streaming from his nose and mouth, his eyes wide with shock and pain, while his hands came up too late to protect himself from a blow that had already landed. The Kralin student's humming reached a crescendo of approval, recognizing the strike as a traditional form of discipline that was both painful and deliberately humiliating, designed to mark the recipient as someone who had failed to show proper respect. Katie was moving before Danny hit the ground, covering the distance to Zarkith in 2 long strides, while her mind coldly assessed the situation and calculated the fastest way to end the threat. "Halt!" Vexthor's voice boomed out with real command authority. But Katie was already crouching next to Danny to check his injuries while keeping her body between him and any follow-up attacks. The young cadet's nose was definitely broken, and blood covered his chin and neck. But his eyes were focusing properly, and he was trying to speak through the pain. More stunned by the sudden violence than seriously hurt. "Stay down," Katie told him quietly while her hands checked for other injuries with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done field medicine in actual combat zones. "Don't try to get up yet." She rose slowly and turned to face Zarkith, who stood with his arms crossed and his crest still dark with righteous anger, clearly expecting approval for having enforced what he viewed as proper discipline. "You just struck a student under instruction," Katie said in a voice that had gone very quiet and very cold. The tone she had used on battlefields when giving final warnings before lethal force became necessary. "I enforced proper respect," Zarkith replied with absolute confidence, looking around at the other Krallen students for support, which they gave with continued humming. The human needed correction for his insult. "He's a student." Katie's voice cut through the humming like a blade through flesh. "This is a training hall, not a combat zone. And what you just did was assault." The prince laughed then, a harsh sound that held genuine amusement at what he clearly viewed as human naivety about how warrior cultures functioned. "By Krallen law, I had every right," he said with exaggerated patience, speaking to her as if explaining simple concepts to a child. "Your human refused to understand his place in the proper order." Katie felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. The same feeling she had experienced in actual combat. When she realized that words had failed and only action would resolve the situation. "If you want to teach lessons about respect," she said carefully while her body shifted into a deceptively casual stance, "maybe you should try someone who can fight back." Zarkith's expression changed then. Surprise and something that might have been excitement flashing across his features as he realized what she was suggesting. "You challenge me?" he asked with barely contained eagerness, his forearms spreading wide in a gesture that among his people signaled acceptance of formal combat. "You wish to defend this inferior's honor through trial?" "No," Katie interrupted him flatly. "I'm going to show you why humans don't play by your rules." The prince laughed again, louder this time, and several of the Krallen students joined him, while Vexthor made distressed sounds and tried to position himself between them. "Lieutenant Morgan, this is not necessary," the commander pleaded, his crest rippling with anxiety. "There are proper channels for grievances, formal procedures we must follow." "He hit a student first," Katie said, without looking away from Zarkith, watching the way the prince was already settling into his formal combat stance with the confidence of someone who had never lost a duel. "This ends now." Zarkith assumed the traditional opening position for Krallen dueling, his forearms positioned in the ceremonial pattern that had been used for thousands of years, his crest raised high in a display that signaled he was fighting for honor and expected his opponent to do the same. Katie dropped into a loose, practical stance that didn't match any formal style taught in the academy. Her weight balanced evenly and her hands open and ready, looking more like someone waiting for a bus than someone preparing for combat. The contrast between them was stark enough that several students gasped in surprise while others muttered in confusion. And Zarkith's confident smile faltered slightly as he tried to identify which fighting tradition she was using. "Will you not even show proper form?" he demanded with a mixture of confusion and contempt. "Do humans truly have no honor in combat?" "Honor doesn't win fights," Katie replied quietly, her eyes never leaving his center mass, where she could track any movement from his forearms simultaneously. "Winning wins fights." Zarkith moved first with the formal opening strike of traditional Kralin dueling, his primary right hand sweeping forward in the ritualized salute blow. That was meant to test an opponent's readiness, while showing respect. For the coming combat, Katie didn't return the salute or acknowledge the gesture in any way, simply watching him with the same cold focus she had learned during actual combat operations, where missing a single detail could mean death. The prince's crest rippled with fresh offense at her refusal to follow protocol, and he straightened from his stance to address the watching students as much as Katie herself. "I am Zarkith, third son of High Lord Carthex, trained in the Crimson Hall under Master Velmer, bearer of 17 victory marks in formal combat." His voice rang out with practiced ceremony, each word part of the traditional announcement that preceded any serious Kralin duel. Katie remained silent and motionless except for the slight movements of her eyes as she tracked his positioning and weight distribution, analyzing the way he stood and moved for weaknesses she could exploit. The watching students began to murmur among themselves, with the Kralin cadets making sounds of outrage at Katie's continued refusal to observe proper dueling customs while the humans exchanged worried glances. Zarkith's patience finally broke her silence, his crest darkening again with anger as he launched into his first real attack sequence, a traditional combination strike that would have been devastating against any opponent trained in conventional Kralin defense. His forearms moved in perfect coordination through forms that had been refined over centuries of warrior tradition, each strike flowing seamlessly into the next with power and precision that demonstrated why his species were feared across the galaxy. Katie sidestepped the entire combination with minimal movement, her feet barely seeming to shift position while her body flowed around his attacks like water around stone. And she still didn't counter or engage, but simply watched him with clinical interest. "Fight with honor," Zarkith demanded, breathing slightly harder now from the exertion of his attack sequence. "You mock me by refusing proper combat. I'm studying you," Katie replied calmly, her voice showing none of the elevated heart rate or adrenaline that should accompany combat. "Keep going." The prince snarled in frustration and launched another attack pattern, this one faster and more aggressive, abandoning some of the ceremonial precision in favor of raw power meant to overwhelm through sheer force. Katie evaded again with the same minimal economy of movement, letting him expend energy while she conserved her own, reading the patterns in how he moved and attacked and recovered. Among the watching Kralin students, the humming had changed tone again, becoming uncertain and confused as they watched their prince's perfect forms accomplish nothing against an opponent who refused to engage. Properly vexed, Thirst stood frozen between his duty to stop the unauthorized combat and his growing fascination with the tactical demonstration playing out before him. His warrior instincts recognizing something important, even if his cultural training couldn't quite identify what the human cadets had moved closer together in a tight group, their faces showing a mixture of fear for Katie's safety and pride that one of their own was holding her ground against a warrior from a species that had ruled entire sectors for millennia. Keth attempted a third combination, then a fourth, each time growing more frustrated as Katie simply wasn't where his strikes landed, her movement so minimal and efficient that it looked almost casual. "Stand and fight." The prince roared with real desperation creeping into his voice now, aware that he was being made to look foolish in front of an audience that included members of his own species and royal house. "Why?" Katie asked with genuine curiosity, still circling him slowly while maintaining her loose, ready stance. "You keep telling me where you're going to strike before you do it." Several of the alien students gasped at this observation, while the Kralin cadets made sounds of protest. But Katie continued speaking, in that same educational tone she had used when teaching combat principles to new recruits. Traditional Kralin forms require you to assume specific postures before certain strikes, she explained while continuing to avoid his increasingly wild attacks. Ritual salute before engagement, honor stance before power strikes, recovery pose after combinations. Zarkith's movements became more erratic as rage overrode his training, his forearms now swinging with raw power, but little of the technical precision he had demonstrated at the start. Every time you follow protocol, you announce your next move, Katie said, her breathing still steady and controlled while the prince was starting to show real signs of exhaustion. Makes you predictable. These forms have been perfected over thousands of years. Zarkith gasped between attacks, his crest now pale from the energy expenditure. They are the ultimate expression of warrior art. They're beautiful, Katie agreed while slipping past another combination. But beauty and effectiveness aren't always the same thing. The prince launched himself forward in what was clearly meant to be a final overwhelming assault, putting all his remaining strength into a complex attack pattern that used all four arms in synchronized strikes designed to leave no opening for defense. Katie waited until he was fully committed to the movement with his weight forward and his arms extended. Then she moved. She stepped inside his reach faster than most of the watching students could track, her left hand catching his primary right wrist while her right hand gripped his secondary left elbow. In one fluid motion, she dropped her weight and rotated her hips, using his own momentum and the leverage of his extended arms to pull him off balance and forwards. Zarkith's eyes went wide with shock as he suddenly found himself falling forward with no way to arrest his motion. His superior size and strength turned against him by simple physics and proper leverage. Katie twisted as she dropped, guiding his fall while adding her own body weight to his uncontrolled momentum. And the massive Kralin prince flipped completely over her hip. The sound of Zarkith hitting the training mat echoed through the suddenly silent hall, his breath exploding out in a whoosh of surprise and pain as his back impacted the polished floor before he could draw breath to respond. Katie had followed him down, her knee pressing into his spine right between his shoulder blades while her hands maintained the arm lock she had used to throw him. The prince struggled reflexively, but any attempt to move caused sharp pain to lance through his twisted arm and shoulder, his own mass working against him as Katie's knee drove his chest harder into the floor. Submit, she said quietly into his ear, her tone utterly calm and professional. You can't win from this position. The entire sequence from her initial movement to having him pinned on the ground had taken less than 3 seconds. So fast that many of the students were still processing the throw while staring at the aftermath. Absolute silence filled the training hall, broken only by Zarkith's labored breathing and the background hum of the station systems. As every student and instructor tried to comprehend what they had just witnessed, Vexor found his voice first, though it came out strained and uncertain in a way no one had ever heard from the confident commander. You did not allow him proper defense, he said slowly, struggling to put into words what bothered him about the entire exchange. You gave no warning of your technique. Katie didn't look up from her position controlling the prince, her attention still focused on the potentially dangerous opponent beneath her regardless of his current inability to move. He didn't give Danny warning before hitting him, she replied with that same professional calm, applying just enough pressure to keep Zarkith immobilized without causing actual injury. The prince made a sound that might have been rage or humiliation or both, his crest cycling through colors rapidly as he processed the reality of his situation. Release me, he demanded with as much authority as someone could manage while pinned face down on a training mat. This is not honorable combat. Katie's voice remained utterly level and unmoved by his protests, the tone of someone explaining basic facts to a student who had failed to understand the lesson. You're right, she agreed easily, maintaining her position and her grip. It's not honorable combat. She paused just long enough for him to think she might be, acknowledging some fault in her methods. Then finished her sentence with cold precision. It's just effective. The watching students erupted in sound then. Kralin cadets protesting loudly while humans cheered and other species made various noises of shock or approval depending on their cultural backgrounds. At first, thrashed against her hold with desperate strength, trying to use his superior size and power to break free. But Katie simply adjusted her position and applied slightly more pressure to the joint lock. The prince gasped and went still again, recognizing that continued struggle would only result in a dislocated shoulder or worse. His warrior training finally overriding his rage enough to accept the reality of complete defeat. "Say it," Katie told him quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos of student reactions. "Apologize to the cadet you hit." "Never." Zarkith managed to force the word out despite the pressure on his spine, his voice shaking with fury and shame. "You have won through deception and dishonor, not true combat skill." Katie said nothing in response, simply maintaining her position with. Katie looked up at Commander Thelax with that same calm expression she had maintained throughout the entire confrontation, her knee still firmly planted on Zarkith's side while her hands controlled his arm in a position that was painful but not damaging. "When he apologizes to Cadet Pierce," she replied evenly, her tone making it clear this was not a negotiation, but a condition for compliance. The Celix's crest flared even darker red, and several other Kralin instructors who had followed him into the hall made sounds of outrage at her refusal to immediately obey a direct command from a superior officer. "You dare to bargain?" The senior commander's voice dropped to a dangerous growl that most species recognized as a prelude to violence. "You hold a royal prince of the Kralin Confederacy in a submission hold and make demands of your commanding officers." He struck an unarmed student first, Katie said without raising her voice or changing her expression, stating it as simple fact rather than justification. "I'm making sure he understands that actions have consequences." Zarkith made another attempt to break free, his pride apparently overriding his pain tolerance. But Katie adjusted her grip with practiced ease, and the prince went still again with a gasp. Vexthor stepped forward with his hands raised in that calming gesture again, his crest showing colors that indicated confusion and distress as he tried to mediate between his fellow Kralin commanders and the human instructor. "Lieutenant Morgan has valid concerns," he said carefully, each word chosen with obvious effort. "Cadet Zarkith did initiate physical contact with Cadet Pierce without proper." "That was correction under Kralin law," Thelax interrupted sharply, his forearms crossing in a gesture that signaled he considered the matter already settled. The human cadet insulted the prince's lineage, and correction was not only appropriate, but required by tradition. Katie felt something cold settle deeper in her chest at those words, recognizing that this went far beyond a single incident and touched on fundamental differences in how their species viewed justice and authority. "So let me understand the rules here," she said with dangerous quiet, finally releasing Zarkith and standing smoothly while the prince scrambled away from her and climbed unsteadily to his feet. "He can hit first as long as he claims someone insulted him. But I can't defend a student because I didn't follow ritual combat protocols. You violated every principle of honorable combat," Thelax stated flatly, gesturing at her with one hand while the others remained crossed. "You used deception, refused to announce your intentions, employed techniques outside recognized warrior traditions, and forced submission without allowing proper surrender. And he hit a kid who was trying to learn." Katie shot back, her voice finally showing some of the anger she had been controlling. "A student under instruction who mispronounced a phrase in a language he's been learning for 6 months. The human cadets had formed a tight group near the edge of the sparring circle, their faces showing mixture of pride and fear as they watched one of their own face down. Multiple senior Kralin officers. Danny had been helped to his feet by two other human students and stood with his hand pressed to his still bleeding nose, his eyes wide as he watched the confrontation that had erupted because of him. Zukith had regained some of his composure, now that he was no longer pinned to the floor, though his crest still showed the pale colors of exhaustion and his breathing remained labored. She brought shame upon herself and her entire species, the prince declared, with as much dignity as he could muster while still unsteady on his feet. Attacking without honor, refusing all protocols of proper warrior combat. I didn't attack you, Katie corrected him with cold precision. I ended a threat after you assaulted a student. There's a difference. Thilax made a sound deep in his chest that was somewhere between a growl and a sigh, his crest cycling through colors that suggested he was struggling to maintain professional composure. Your human philosophies have no place in warrior training, he said with the weight of absolute certainty. Combat without honor is mere violence, and violence without meaning is the mark of primitives. Katie felt her jaw tighten at the word primitives, a term she had heard applied to humans more times than she could count since joining the Galactic Federation, always delivered with that same tone of superiority. Then your honor system is broken, she said quietly, and the words fell into sudden silence as even the background murmur of student conversation stopped. Where I come from, hitting someone first means you don't get to complain about how they hit back. The Kralin instructors made various sounds of shock and offense, their crests all showing dark colors that indicated she had crossed some invisible line of acceptable discourse. But Katie wasn't finished. Years of watching humans treated as second-class citizens in a federation that supposedly valued all species equally finally breaking. Through her professional restraint, your traditions say he had the right to hit Danny because of some perceived insult, she continued, her voice growing stronger. But those same traditions say I'm dishonorable for stopping him without following rules. He didn't bother with when he threw the first punch. That is not the same situation, Vexter protested weakly, though his tone suggested even he was beginning to see the logical problem. Correction and combat have different protocols, only because the protocols are designed to protect the people doing the correcting, Katie replied, turning to face him directly. Your system lets warriors hit people who can't fight back and call it honor. But when someone fights back effectively, you call it shameful. Danny stepped forward then, despite his injuries, blood still dripping from his broken nose, but his voice steady as he addressed the Kralin commanders. Sir, he hit me without any warning, the young cadet said with obvious nervousness but determination. No formal challenge, no chance to defend myself or apologize. Just punishment because I said a word wrong. Zarkith's crest darkened again with fresh anger at being contradicted by the human he viewed as beneath his notice, and his forearms spread in an aggressive display. You insulted my family's honor with your crude attempts at proper speech, the prince snarled, some of his earlier confidence returning now that he had support from the senior Kralin officers. I had every right to correct such disrespect. What exactly did he say that was so insulting? Katie asked with genuine curiosity, looking between Zarkith and Vexter. What were his exact words? Vexter shifted uncomfortably and made a sound that might have been throat-clearing in a species without throats, his crest showing colors that suggested embarrassment. He mispronounced the honorific prefix for the prince's house name, the commander admitted reluctantly. Said Karthex with hard consonants instead of the proper Karthex with the glottal pause. Katie stared at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch while that information settled over everyone in the hall. He got hit for bad pronunciation? She asked finally, her tone suggesting she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Not for an actual insult, not for refusing to show respect, just for not knowing how to make a sound that doesn't exist in human languages. The human cadets made sounds of outrage while several of the alien students from other species exchanged uncomfortable glances, apparently also realizing how arbitrary the insult had been. Thilax's expression hardened even further, if that was possible, his massive frame seeming to grow more imposing as he drew himself up to his full height. "The human lacks proper training in our traditions and customs," he said with finality. "That is precisely why this incident demonstrates that humans are not yet ready for full integration into warrior cultures. Or maybe it demonstrates that your warrior culture needs to update its traditions," Katie replied, knowing she was probably ending her career at the academy, but unable to stop herself. Because attacking students for pronunciation errors isn't honor. It's bullying before Thilax could respond. The sound of approaching footsteps made everyone turn to see Commandant Gregory Cole entering the training hall with his typical unhurried stride. The human commander's presence immediately changed the dynamic of the confrontation, his rank and authority transcending species politics. And Katie felt both relief and apprehension at his arrival. Cole had a datapad in his hand, and his expression gave nothing away as he surveyed the scene, taking in Danny's bloody face, Zarkith's disheveled appearance, and a clear division between human and Krallan students and instructors. "Interesting training session," he observed mildly, his voice carrying easily across the hall despite not being raised. "I've been watching the security feed." Katie came to attention automatically, years of military discipline overriding her emotional state. Though she kept her expression neutral and her shoulders back. "Sir, I can explain," she began, but Cole cut her off with a slight gesture. "No need." "Lots lot," the Commandant said while still studying his datapad. "I saw everything from the initial confrontation through the physical altercation." Thilax stepped forward with his crest, showing the formal colors that indicated he was about to make an official complaint, his forearms positioning in the gesture that preceded formal charges under Federation military law. "Commandant Cole, this human instructor has violated sacred Krallan combat traditions," he stated with absolute certainty. "She attacked a royal prince without." Commander Vexter spent the next 3 days reviewing security footage from the training hall incident, watching the confrontation from multiple angles while cross-referencing academy regulations and cultural protocols from dozens of species. What started as a simple investigation into unauthorized combat between an instructor and cadet gradually revealed something far more troubling as he expanded his search through the Academy's records. The pattern became clear after the first day when he discovered 17 separate incidents over the past 6 months where Krallan students had used honor correction on cadets from other species. All of them officially recorded and dismissed as proper enforcement of respect protocols. By the second day, he had found 23 more incidents that had been reported but not officially logged. Complaints from human, Valorian, and Centauri cadets about physical discipline that ranged from ritual slaps to more serious strikes by. The third day, Vexter sat alone in his office staring at screens, full of data that painted his own species in a light he had never wanted to see, showing systematic use of tradition as justification for intimidation. Katie found him there late in the evening of that third day, standing at his door until he noticed her presence and gestured for her to enter with obvious reluctance. "Lieutenant Morgan," he said formally, his crest showing colors that indicated shame and internal conflict. "I suppose you have come to verify my findings before the disciplinary hearing." "Actually, I came to see if you were okay," Katie replied quietly, settling into one of the chairs designed for Krallan physiology with some awkwardness. "You've been in here for days." Vexter made a sound that might have been bitter laughter in his species, his forearms spreading in a gesture that indicated helpless resignation. "I have been blind," he said with weight of genuine pain in his voice. "We Krallan pride ourselves on warrior honor and proper traditions. But I have discovered we have been using those very traditions as weapons against those weaker than ourselves. Katie remained silent, recognizing that he needed to work through this realization on his own terms rather than having it explained to him. Your human combat philosophy seemed crude to me, Vexter continued, still not looking at her but staring at the data screens. No ritual, no ceremony, no beauty in the movements. Just raw efficiency focused entirely on ending conflicts quickly, because humans learned to fight in wars where pretty forms got you killed, Katie said softly, repeating what she had told him during their first conversations about training methods. We learned on a planet where everything wanted to eat us, and yet you stopped. The Kralin commander finally turned to face her directly, his crest showing colors she had never seen before on any of his species. You had Zarkith completely at your mercy, could have injured him permanently to make your point. But you chose restraint. Katie shrugged slightly, uncomfortable with the praise, but understanding why he needed to say it. That's also human philosophy, she replied, choosing her words carefully. Use enough force to end the threat. Not more. Vexter was quiet for a long moment, his crest cycling through colors that suggested deep thought. Then he pulled up a new data file on his screen. I will be recommending major changes to Academy policy, he said with quiet determination. No student may physically discipline another student for any reason. All challenges must be officially sanctioned and supervised. And we need new protocols that respect combat traditions from all species equally. The official Academy assembly 3 days later filled the main auditorium with every cadet and instructor from all training sections. The mixed crowd creating a patchwork of species and colors that represented the diversity. Of the Galactic Federation Commandant Cole stood at the podium with Vexter beside him while Katie waited in the front row alongside Danny and Zarkith, all three of them uncertain about what the formal ruling would bring. We are here to address a systemic failure and how this academy has applied cultural traditions, Cole began without preamble, his voice carrying clearly through the hall speaker system. An investigation has revealed that our respect for Kralin warrior customs has inadvertently enabled harassment and intimidation of students from other species. The Kralin cadets and instructors made sounds of protest, but Cole continued, speaking over them with steady authority. Commander, Vexter will present his findings, the commandant said, stepping aside to let the Kralin instructor take the podium. Vexter's crest showed formal colors as he addressed the assembly, his forearms positioned in the posture that indicated he was speaking as representative of his entire species. I have reviewed security footage and incident reports covering the past 2 years, he said with visible difficulty, each word clearly costing him something. What I found shames me and should shame all Kralin present. He proceeded to outline the pattern of behavior that Katie's confrontation with Zarkith had exposed, showing data that demonstrated how honor correction had been systematically abused to establish hierarchy through fear. We have been using our traditions not to maintain proper respect, but to assert dominance. Vexter continued as his crest darkened with obvious shame. We have become what we most despise, bullies hiding behind the language of honor. The silence that followed his words was absolute and uncomfortable, broken only when Commandant Cole returned to the podium to announce new academy regulations. Physical correction by students was immediately banned regardless of cultural tradition. All combat challenges required official approval and supervision, and any future violations would result in immediate expulsion without appeal. Cadet Zarkith, Cole said formally, looking directly at the Kralin prince, who stood rigid with barely controlled emotion. You have 2 options available to you. The entire auditorium held its breath, waiting to hear what judgment would fall on the 3rd son of a Kralin ruling house. You may offer formal apology to Cadet Pierce and complete mandatory cultural sensitivity training, Cole stated clearly, or you may withdraw from the academy effective immediately. Zarkith's crest went through rapid color changes, showing the internal battle between pride and pragmatism. His forearms clenching and unclenching while he struggled with the choice. Katie found herself watching him with something unexpected. Not satisfaction at his humiliation, but genuine curiosity about whether he could learn and grow from this experience. The prince stood silent for so long that people began whispering among themselves. Speculation running through the crowd about whether the royal cadet would choose pride over his military career. Then slowly, his crest showing colors that indicated reluctant acceptance, Zarkith stepped forward and turned to face Danny directly. "I was wrong," he said in Crown first, then repeated it in standard Galactic, and finally in halting but clear English. "I struck you out of pride and anger, not honor or justice." Danny's expression showed shock at the apology, clearly not expecting anything close to genuine contrition. And for a moment, he seemed unsure how to respond. "I accept your apology," the young human cadet finally managed, his voice steady despite obvious nervousness at being the center of attention. "And I would like to learn more about your culture properly so I don't make the same mistake again." Something shifted in Zarkith's posture then, some of the rigid tension leaving his frame as if Danny's words had lifted a weight he hadn't known he was carrying 2 days later. Katie found the Kralin prince waiting outside her training office, his crest showing colors that indicated formal request for instruction. "I wish to learn human combat methods," Zarkith said without preamble, his forearms held in posture that signaled student to teacher rather than noble to commoner. "I want to understand why I lost so quickly." Katie studied him for a moment, looking for signs of false contrition or hidden resentment, but finding only genuine curiosity and something that might have been shame. "You lost because you were fighting a sparring match," she said honestly, gesturing for him to follow her into the training room. "I was ending a threat." Over the following weeks they established an unlikely routine, with Zarkith arriving early before regular training sessions to learn human combat philosophy alongside its physical applications. Katie taught him how humans approach fighting without ritual constraints, showing him the difference between fighting to demonstrate skill and fighting to survive. "Every fight is different," she explained during one session while demonstrating how to adapt to unexpected situations. "You can't rely on rehearsed combinations because real opponents don't follow scripts." Zarkith proved to be a dedicated student once his pride stopped interfering with his learning, his forearms giving him unique advantages in grappling that he learned to use without telegraphing through traditional poses. Danny often joined these sessions, his broken nose healed but leaving a slight permanent bend that he wore with unexpected pride. And the young human cadet seemed to grow in confidence with each training day. The academy gradually shifted its entire approach to combat instruction, with Vexter and Katie co-teaching a new required course called Combat Philosophy Across Cultures that examined different species' approaches to conflict. They explored how Kralin ritualized combat to make it meaningful, how Valorians used martial arts as meditation, how Centauri viewed fighting as mathematics, and how humans treated it as problem-solving under